Hello again, everyone. As always, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps me grow this channel if you like what I'm doing. And if you want notifications, you can even hit the little, I think it's a bell right now. Sometimes, I don't know if they ever change those, but that way you get notified whenever I post a new video. Check out my blog, and you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as what I'm most commonly posting on. So one of the things that you might have noticed is I really try to mix things up and do different brands, just different things to where I'm not like getting stuck in a rut or anything like that. And I just reviewed a Krishna ink a couple weeks ago. It was Krishna Goldfish Gold. But I recently asked my wife, I was like, hey, what ink should I review? Because I was just going to go to another blue ink probably if I didn't ask. And she's like, do something green. And that's her favorite color. One of the things she enjoys, one of her favorite colors overall. So I kind of dug through my box. I think I have 50 inks or so, and Krishna Shamrock was the first green ink that I came across, and so I figured I'd give it a shot. So this came from a fellow fountain pen lover from a group that I'm a part of on Facebook. I posted on there and asked where people buy their samples, and he offered to give me, as long as I provided little vials or ink, some way to sample his ink without giving me the whole bottles. He provided me with a bunch of ink samples. So I bought these little things, which I would never buy again for ink. As you can see, the label's covered in ink. If you go to my blog post, you'll also see that my fingers got pretty well covered in ink as well. That's because the opening on these is pretty small. You can fit a converter in there, but for some reason it doesn't suck up the ink when I advance it, and I don't know why that would be the case. So, and getting ink on my fingers already too. So I have to pour it into the cap, which I then put the converter in and then fill it up. So enough of that, enough of a little sidetrack. So for this review, I used the Pilot Metropolitan with a fine nib. It's a common pen that people have in their collections, so I feel confident that people will be able to draw conclusions from this about how it will function in their own pens as well. So right from the start, I noticed that this was going to be a very wet ink. I made the swatch first, which I usually wait to do until a little later in the week. But I just noticed, if you look at the dry times on this, like if you go to 1 second, I'll try to get a little bit closer. I got to turn it though. If you go to 1 second, you'll see that the ink was almost completely wiped away. Even up to 5 seconds, it's pretty wet. 7 seconds, it's starting to stay on the paper. But even between 10 and about 17 seconds, it's still wiping a decent amount away. 17 seconds is starting to dry pretty well. So between 20 seconds and 30 seconds where I noticed that, you still get some slight smears on my scribbles, but not as much. So it's a very wet ink. If you're left-handed, it might be somewhat difficult for you to be able to get around. You're probably going to end up with a lot of ink on the side of your palm. But whatever. So while I was using it on, I'm still using my Jarbo dot grid journal, which I think I put away. But the ink goes through it pretty bad. Let's see if I can find my sample of where I wrote. So here's some notes that I did with it, just for this review. Let me see what's on the back side. I think it's just my notes for the 7 series of Zebra, which I'll be doing next week. But you can see it ghosted through pretty bad. On some cases, like right there, it bled through. So this is, I forget what GSM paper it is, 70 GSM paper. So not super high quality, but also not terribly low quality. As I moved up into like medium quality paper with, I have a Tau Tree journal at work right now because my Omega journal is almost finished. There was a little bit of feathering on that one. That one has 100 GSM paper. Slight feathering, but no ghosting. I tried it on the IBAM journal, which 120 GSM paper. Let's see if I can find where I put it on that one. I just did some scribbles on this one right there, but there's no feathering that I can see. And then I can't open the other side because I have work notes on there, or old work notes, but there's no ghosting and there's no bleed through. So as always, I have some premium quality samples of paper from Goulet pens with their notebook sampler. But before I get to those ones, I have a Leuchtturm 1917. I'm not going to be able to get it super close without turning it, but you can see no feathering. And then if I go on the back side, actually there's some light ghosting, but there's some ghosting with almost all of the inks that I've tried on this so far. So we'll see how this handles overall. But just while I'm talking, I'll kind of go through these pretty quick. This is a Clairefontaine notebook, so it performed very well on the Clairefontaine paper. Only slight ghosting, nothing that's too noticeable. My Nemesine B7, there's very, very light feathering, but nothing super noticeable. And if I go to the back side, not really any ghosting that you can see on paper or on the camera. But when I close it, you can see some light ghosting through. But you can also see that with the paper on the other side. An Apica CD5 performed very well. And no ghosting. So that one's great. My favorite, Arodia number 12, perfectly performed super well, and slight ghosting. So, but again, barely noticeable. This one is a Traveler's Company notebook, so no feathering, maybe slight where the ink, especially where the ink was put down heavily, especially on downstrokes, and ghosting, but you can see that with nearly all of them. This one's Tomo River paper, a Goulet Pens pocket notebook, and then no ghosting. So Tomo River paper does great. And for my ink swatch, I used a Rhodia dot pad, which has 80 GSM paper. You go to the back, you can see that the heavier writing did bleed through. It's gonna be like the glass dip pen, and just where I put down a ton of ink on it. So it did actually even bleed through a bit to the other side of the paper, which is going to be related to that part right there. So this ink is just super wet. One thing that I like about it is the variation that you get in color. It's very earthy. And if you go to where it's very heavy to put down, it almost looks like evergreen needles, which are just, I love those trees. I think they're awesome. Super dark, really earthy green. And then as you move up to pens that put down a bit lighter ink, you get a bit of a more, it reflects more of its namesake, a shamrock, kind of like that leafy green that you see on deciduous trees, a little bit brighter, just a little bit better overall. So shading on this, same thing. It varies from that dark to light green. Again, it really just depends on what ink or how wet your pen is. So it was not waterproof pretty much at all. It took off quite a bit of ink wherever the ink or wherever the water droplets were sitting. And then I'll take a paper towel when I'm wiping it off and drag it across it, and it took quite a bit of ink with it. So this little pattern I did with the fountain pen, and again, you can just see a good variety in the color there as well. So that's about all that I was able to test with this ink. On very, very cheap paper, understandably, it just didn't work very well. I happen to have, if I can grab it behind my laptop, some really cheap paper. This is just a notebook that I've had lying around for years. But you can see it's starting to feather. I don't know if you can see that on camera very well. Let me try zooming in. Starting to feather a bit around the edges, and ghosting and bleeding through. So if you're going to use this ink, you want to be conscious of what paper you're using it with. It's not going to work well on your standard notebook. Even on some of the better quality papers, it did have some light ghosting. I wouldn't say bleed through too bad, because these ones, I put down a ton of ink when I do these. And the glass dip pen that I have puts down a ton of ink as well. So for standard fountain pens, you'll probably be fine. But if your pen writes wet, you're definitely going to want to take all of that into consideration. So thanks again for watching. I hope you liked this review. Please feel free to ask me any questions or comment below on what you thought. Thanks again, everyone.